Put the money behind that laugh. Maya Brooks said it so calmly that Richard Caldwell stopped smiling for half a second. Around table 12 at the Meridian Room, for executives turned toward the black waitress standing beside a tray of untouched dessert plates. Richard, a 52-year-old billionaire hedge fund founder, leaned back in his chair and studied her as though she had suddenly become tonight's entertainment. Minutes earlier, Maya had quietly pointed out that the probability model open in front of his senior analyst contained a flawed assumption. Richard had laughed. Now Maya was looking directly at him. "You believe the model is wrong?" he asked. "I believe the assumption driving it is wrong." Ethan Cole, Richard's quantitative analyst, glanced down at his notebook. "Which assumption?" Maya nodded toward a line near the bottom of the page. "The one treating those outcomes as independent after the third condition changes." Richard laughed again, louder this time. Several diners at nearby tables looked over. Maya did not move. "Do you know what we are discussing?" Richard asked. "Enough to know that number should not be there." "That number," Richard said, tapping the notebook, "came from people who are paid very well to understand numbers." Maya's expression remained composed. "Salary does not make an equation correct." Ethan looked up sharply. Richard's smile narrowed. "What is your name?" "Maya Brooks." "Well, Maya Brooks, you have confidence. I have a question about the math." "No, you have an opinion about the math." Richard reached into his jacket, removed an expensive pen, and placed it beside Ethan's notebook. "So let us find out which one it is." Olivia Grant, the floor manager, noticed the attention gathering around the table and approached quickly. "Mr. Caldwell, is everything all right?" "Perfectly." Richard never took his eyes off Maya. "Your waitress thinks she can correct my analysts." Olivia turned toward Maya with alarm. "Maya, I can take over here." "No," Richard said. "She should stay." He pulled a blank page from a leather portfolio and wrote several figures across it. Maya watched without leaning closer. Richard finished, turned the page around, and slid it toward the edge of the table. "Same principle. Different variables. Solve it." Ethan studied the page, then looked at Richard. "That is not exactly simple." "That is the point." Richard looked at Maya. "If you solve it correctly, I will put $1 million behind your answer." The nearby conversations faded. Even Olivia went still. Maya looked at the page, then at Richard. $1 million for me. If you can do what you apparently think my team cannot." Maya shook her head. "Not for me. Put it into a scholarship fund." Richard blinked. "A scholarship fund? For students who are good enough to stay in school but cannot afford to." Something passed through Maya's eyes, gone almost immediately. Richard mistook it for hesitation. His smile returned. "Fine. $1 million. Maya picked up the pen. "And when I solve it?" Richard leaned back, completely certain of the ending. "Then I stop laughing." Maya looked down at the numbers. She did not reach for a calculator. She did not ask for more time. She simply turned the page slightly, studied the first condition, and said, "You might want to get comfortable, Mr. Caldwell. The part that is going to take time is not solving this. It is explaining why your original model is wrong." 30 minutes earlier, Maya Brooks had been moving through the Meridian Room like she did every Friday night, balancing polished plates, remembering special requests, and navigating crowded tables without wasting a step. At 29, Maya had worked at the Manhattan restaurant for nearly 3 years. Most guests remembered the wine list better than they remembered her name. She had learned not to take that personally. Table 7 wanted the salmon without butter. Table 9 needed an allergy note confirmed with the kitchen. Table 14 had ordered 2 bottles of sparkling water, but received 3 on the check. Maya noticed the mistake before the payment terminal did. "Your total should be $286.40, she told the couple. The man looked at the printed check. "It says 304. 1 bottle was entered twice." Maya corrected it before he could reach for his card. "Good catch," he said. Maya smiled. "Have a good evening." She moved on. Near the service station, another server named Daniel was struggling with a 6-way split for a business dinner. "The system keeps giving me different totals," he whispered. Maya glanced at the receipt. "Because you divided the tax after applying the 2 separate discounts. Reverse those steps." Daniel stared at her. "You saw that in 5 seconds." "It was closer to 7. He laughed. Maya was already walking away. Olivia Grant, the floor manager, appeared beside the reservation screen. "Maya, table 12 is yours." Maya looked toward the private corner of the dining room. for men in expensive suits were being escorted toward it. Staff members suddenly stood straighter. Who are they? Maya asked. Richard Caldwell and his team. Olivia lowered her voice. Caldwell Capital. Billionaire. Very important regular. Keep everything clean and simple. Maya nodded. Same as every table. Not exactly. Olivia glanced toward Richard. For tonight, exactly. Maya picked up 4 menus and approached. Richard Caldwell was already speaking before he sat down. I want the revised numbers before Monday. If the downside probability stays below 8%, we move. Ethan Cole, seated beside him, opened a leather notebook. The current model puts it at 7.4. Maya placed a menu in front of Richard. Good evening. Richard continued talking without looking at her. Sparkling water. The usual bottle. Maya turned to Ethan. Still or sparkling? Ethan looked up. Still, please. Thank you. Maya moved around the table, taking orders while Richard discussed projections, risk thresholds, and a potential investment large enough to change the direction of his fund. She did not interrupt. She did not stare. But numbers had always been difficult for Maya not to hear. To her, they formed relationships before they formed answers. 40 minutes later, while clearing appetizer plates, she noticed Ethan's notebook open beside his laptop. A probability tree covered the page. Maya's hand slowed for less than a second. Something was wrong. She looked again. The third condition changed the sample space, but the calculation below continued as if nothing had changed. Maya collected the final plate and turned away. It was none of her business. She had 6 other tables. Behind her, Ethan said, so the denominator stays fixed from this point forward. Maya stopped. She should have kept walking. Instead, almost under her breath, she said, it cannot. Ethan heard her. Excuse me. Maya turned back. Nothing. I am sorry. Ethan glanced at the notebook. You said it cannot. Maya hesitated. The denominator changes after the third condition. Ethan stared at her. Across the table, Richard slowly lifted his eyes from his phone. For the first time that evening, he looked directly at Maya. Did the waitress just correct my analyst? Richard Caldwell kept his eyes on Maya, as if waiting for someone at the table to confirm that he had heard correctly. Yes, Ethan said carefully. She did. Richard placed his phone beside his plate. And you believe the denominator changes? Maya glanced at Ethan's notebook. It has to. Has to. Richard repeated, amused. That is a strong statement. The third condition changes which outcomes are still possible. You cannot keep dividing by the original set after removing part of it. Ethan looked down again. His expression tightened slightly. Richard noticed. Do not tell me you are actually considering this. I am checking it. You built the model. Which is why I am checking it. Maya reached for the empty appetizer plates. I should get these out of your way. Richard raised one hand. Wait. Maya stopped. You corrected him. Finish the thought. Olivia was already moving toward the table from across the dining room. Maya could see concern in her face. Mr. Caldwell, I was not trying to interrupt your meeting. But you did. Richard leaned forward. So explain it. Maya set the plates back down. The model begins with one population of possible outcomes. After your third condition, some of those outcomes no longer qualify. The numerator changes, but your denominator does not. That makes the probability look smaller than it actually is. Ethan turned the notebook toward himself and traced the calculation with his finger. One of the executives beside him leaned closer. How much smaller? Maya looked at the page. Enough that I would not call 7.4% your real downside probability. Richard gave a short laugh. And what would you call it? Incomplete. Olivia arrived. Maya, the kitchen needs you. Maya knew it was an exit. She nodded. Of course. Richard looked at Olivia. Give us 2 minutes. Olivia hesitated. Mr. Caldwell, Maya has other tables. I am aware. He turned back to Maya. What makes you qualified to call my analysts incomplete? Maya's expression did not change. The calculation. I asked what qualifies you. And I answered. Ethan looked up. Richard smiled again, but there was less humor in it now. Numbers are not that simple. That is exactly why the denominator matters. One executive covered a smile with his water glass. Richard noticed that too. He pulled Ethan's notebook closer and pointed to the model. All right. If this is wrong, show me where. Maya did not touch the notebook. You already know where. Humor me. Maya pointed to the third condition. Recalculate from there using the reduced sample space. Ethan began typing into his laptop. Richard watched him. 10 seconds passed. Then 20. The restaurant continued around them, silverware touching plates, quiet conversations drifting beneath soft music, but table 12 had gone still. Ethan stopped typing. Richard. What? Ethan turned the screen slightly. She is right about the denominator. Richard's face did not move. What does that do to the result? Ethan entered another figure. It pushes the downside estimate above 9%. One of the executives sat back. Richard looked from the screen to Maya. You did that in your head. Maya picked up the plates again. I noticed the structure. That is not the same thing. Richard studied her more carefully now. For the first time, he was not looking at a waitress who had spoken out of turn. He was looking at a problem he could not immediately explain. Where did you learn probability? He asked. Maya balanced the plates on her tray. Does the answer change if I learned it somewhere you respect? Richard went quiet for a beat. Maya turned to leave. Then he reached for his pen. No, he said. Now I want to know whether that was skill or luck. Maya stopped. Behind her, Richard pulled a blank sheet from his portfolio. Come back, Ms. Brooks. Let us find out. Richard began writing before Maya could decide whether to stay. He drew a probability tree across the blank page, added 3 conditional outcomes, then changed one variable near the bottom. His movements were quick and confident, the movements of a man accustomed to setting the terms of every conversation. Ethan watched from beside him. Maya remained standing with the tray balanced against one hand. There, Richard said, turning the page toward her. No investment model. No company data. Nothing you could have seen before tonight. Maya glanced at the page. You think I memorized the first answer? I think one correct observation does not make someone an expert. I never called myself an expert. Richard leaned back. Then perhaps we agree. Maya studied the problem again. No. We agree that you still have not checked why I was right. One of the executives looked down, hiding a smile. Richard noticed. What I am checking, he said, is whether you understand the mathematics or stumbled into the answer. Olivia stood several feet away, clearly waiting for an opportunity to pull Maya back to work. Maya looked toward her other tables. I have guests waiting. This will not take long, Richard replied. You sound very certain. I am. Maya set the tray carefully on an empty service stand. All right. Richard pushed the paper closer. Solve it. Maya did not reach for his pen. She read the first condition, then the second. Her eyes stopped at the final branch. You made the same mistake. Richard's smile disappeared for an instant. I wrote this 30 seconds ago. That does not make the structure different. Ethan leaned forward. What are you seeing? Maya pointed toward the final 2 outcomes. He changed the probability of the event but kept the dependency relationship from the original setup. Those 2 choices conflict. Richard looked at Ethan. Does she need to calculate anything before making that claim? Ethan studied the page. Not if she is right about the dependency. And is she? Ethan hesitated. I need a minute. Richard exhaled through his nose. Of course you do. Maya finally picked up the pen. She wrote a short expression beneath Richard's problem, crossed out one term, then replaced it with another. This is the conditional probability after your change. She added a second line. This is what happens if you preserve the relationship you wrote above. Then a third. She placed the pen down. They cannot both be true. Ethan pulled the paper toward himself. His eyes moved across the 3 lines twice. That is clean, he said quietly. Richard stared at him. Clean is not the same as correct. Ethan opened his laptop and entered the values. Give me a second. Maya picked up her tray. You can verify it without me. Richard looked at her uniform, then at the 3 handwritten lines. Where did you learn to do that? We are back to that question. It is a reasonable question. Only after you decide whether the answer is right. Ethan stopped typing. He leaned toward the screen, checked one figure, then another. Richard. The billionaire did not look at him. Well, she is right again. The executive across the table gave a low whistle before catching himself. Richard's jaw tightened. Maya reached for the appetizer plates. Now I really should get back to work. Wait. Richard's voice carried farther than he intended. Several nearby diners turned. He lowered it. One more. Maya looked at him. Why? Because 2 examples are still a pattern I can test. Maya's expression changed slightly. You are not testing a pattern anymore. What am I testing? Whether you can find a version where being wrong feels less uncomfortable. Ethan looked down. Richard stared at Maya for a long moment. Then he reached into his portfolio and pulled out another sheet of paper. This time he did not smile. Fine, he said. Let us make the next one worth something. Richard placed the new sheet in front of Maya, but kept one hand resting on its edge. $1 million, he said. The words traveled farther than he intended, and conversation at two nearby tables softened almost immediately. Maya looked at him without reaching for the paper. $1 million for solving a probability problem. $1 million if you solve this one correctly. Richard glanced toward Ethan. And my analyst verifies every step. Ethan shifted in his chair. Richard, we already established that she understood the first two. Then this should be easy. Maya studied Richard's face. What happens if I lose? Richard smiled. You admit that two lucky observations became a little too much confidence. Olivia stepped closer. Mr. Caldwell, Maya is working, and I am offering her the most profitable 5 minutes of her shift. The comment drew a faint laugh from one executive. Maya heard it. Her expression remained still. I do not want your $1 million. Richard raised his eyebrows. Everyone wants $1 million. Then give it to someone who needs it. Meaning? Maya looked at the blank space beneath the problem. If I solve it, donate $1 million to a scholarship fund for students who have the grades to stay in college but cannot afford to stay there. Ethan looked at her with sudden curiosity. Richard's smile weakened. You would turn down $1 million? That is not what I said. I told you where to put it. For the first time, nobody at the table laughed. Richard slowly removed his hand from the page. Fine. $1 million to a scholarship fund. In writing. Richard stared at her. You think my word is not enough? Maya answered evenly. You brought money into a mathematics problem. I am making sure both sides are defined. Ethan lowered his eyes, hiding a smile. Richard pulled a second sheet from his portfolio and wrote a short pledge, dated it, and signed his name. He slid it across the table. Maya read every word. Satisfied? Almost. She pointed to one line. It says if I provide the correct numerical answer. It should say if the reasoning and conclusion are mathematically correct. Richard looked at her for a long second, then changed the sentence and initialed it. Now. Maya nodded. Now. Olivia watched from beside the table, no longer trying to interrupt. Maya finally picked up Richard's pen and studied the challenge. It was harder than the earlier examples. Multiple conditional events crossed through a changing sample space, and one branch depended on information revealed only after the second stage. Richard watched her eyes move across the page. 10 seconds passed. Then 20. His confidence began returning. Take your time, he said. Maya ignored him. She turned the sheet sideways and wrote one line. Ethan leaned forward. She wrote a second beneath it, replacing Richard's original conditional term with a reduced expression. Then she stopped. Richard smiled. Problem. Maya shook her head, checking whether there is a shorter way. She crossed out 4 symbols and rewrote the expression. A third line followed. Then she put the pen down. There. Richard looked at the page. That is your answer? That is the structure. The number follows from it. Ethan pulled the sheet toward himself and began checking each step on his laptop. Richard leaned back. 3 lines for $1 million. Maya picked up her tray. 3 lines are enough if they are the right 3. Ethan's fingers stopped moving. He stared at the screen, recalculated, then looked at Maya's page again. Richard's eyes stayed on Maya. What? Ethan turned the laptop around. Every step checks out. The table went silent. Richard looked at the signed pledge lying beside his plate, then at Maya. The amusement had disappeared from his face. Maya calmly lifted the tray. Your desserts will be out shortly. Richard glanced once more at the 3 lines. Wait. Maya stopped. Richard's voice was quieter now. I want to make the next problem harder. Maya looked back at him. Then I assume the scholarship gets larger too. Richard Caldwell studied Maya for several seconds, as though he had not expected her to answer so quickly. $5 million, he said at last. Ethan looked up immediately. Richard, she wants the scholarship larger. Let us make it larger. Richard pulled the signed pledge back toward him, crossed out the original amount, wrote $5 million, and initialed the change. He turned the document toward Maya. Solve the next problem correctly, and the fund gets $5 million. Maya read the revised pledge without touching it. And if I do not, the first $1 million still stands. You already earned that. Maya nodded once. Fair. Richard began constructing the new problem on a fresh sheet. This time, he worked more carefully. He created several dependent events, introduced incomplete information after the second stage, then added a decision rule that changed according to the observed outcome. Ethan watched closely. You are combining two different frameworks. Exactly, Richard said. She wanted harder. Maya remained standing beside the table while Olivia quietly arranged for another server to cover Maya's nearby guests. Richard finished and slid the page across. This one did not exist 5 minutes ago. Nobody memorized it. Nobody taught it to you. Maya looked down at the problem. You are still trying to explain the first answers. I am eliminating possibilities. Except the obvious one. Richard folded his hands. Which is? Maya met his eyes. That I know what I am doing. The executive nearest Ethan looked away. Richard did not smile. Prove it. Maya pulled out the chair at the end of the table and sat for the first time. The change made Ethan straighten. She read the problem once without writing anything. 30 seconds passed. Then a minute. Richard glanced toward the others, his confidence slowly returning. Maya finally picked up the pen. She wrote an expression, paused, then crossed it out. Richard noticed immediately. Changed your mind. Checked an assumption. And it was wrong. Richard leaned back with visible satisfaction. Yours? Yes. Maya wrote again. That is what checking your work is for. Ethan looked at her with something close to respect. Maya drew two short branches, labeled the conditional states, and reduced the second expression. Richard watched every movement. 2 minutes passed. Maya stopped again. There are two possible interpretations of your decision rule. Richard frowned. There is one. Then define what happens when the observation arrives after the choice, but before the outcome. Ethan turned toward Richard. She's right. That timing is ambiguous. Richard looked at his own page. Assume the observation arrives before the choice. Maya nodded. Then this branch disappears. She crossed out one path and continued. Richard's expression tightened. Maya was not racing anymore. She checked each line, returned once to an earlier term, corrected a sign, and continued without embarrassment. Nearly 4 minutes later, she placed the pen down. Now it is complete. Ethan pulled the page toward himself. He began checking the derivation line by line. 1 minute passed. Then another. Maya remained seated, hands folded loosely in front of her. Richard broke the silence. You took longer this time. You asked a harder question. And you made 2 corrections. Yes. That does not bother you. Maya looked at him. Being wrong for 30 seconds bothers me less than staying wrong, because I am too proud to check. Ethan stopped typing. His eyes remained on the laptop. Richard turned toward him. Well, Ethan checked the final value once more. It works. Richard stared at the page. Ethan continued, quieter now. The derivation is correct. Maya stood and pushed the chair back into place. Richard looked at the $5 million pledge, then at her. Who are you? Maya picked up her tray. The same waitress I was before you knew I could solve it. Richard opened his mouth, but Maya glanced at Ethan's original notebook. Something in the financial model caught her attention again. She leaned closer, studying a column she had not seen clearly before. Her expression changed. Ethan noticed. What? Maya did not answer immediately. She pointed to a figure near the bottom of the page. Is this from the actual investment model? Ethan nodded slowly. Yes. Maya looked at Richard. Then the $5 million is not the number you should be worried about. Maya kept her finger beside the figure while Ethan turned the notebook toward himself. What exactly are you seeing? He asked. The same dependency problem, Maya said, except this time it is buried inside the model you are actually using. Richard leaned forward. We already corrected the denominator. One denominator, Maya replied. This assumption appears again downstream. Ethan scrolled through his laptop, comparing the spreadsheet with his handwritten notes. Where? Maya pointed to a transition between 2 risk states. There. Your model treats that branch as though the earlier condition no longer affects it. Richard shook his head. That section was tested. Then tested again. His eyes narrowed. You are very comfortable giving instructions at my table. Maya met his stare. You were comfortable asking me to prove myself at it. The executive beside Ethan stopped touching his dessert spoon. Olivia remained near the service station, watching the exchange without interrupting. Ethan enlarged the model on his screen. Give me a minute. Richard looked at Maya. You realize this is not a classroom exercise anymore. I realized that before you did. We are discussing a real investment. That is why I said the $5 million is not the number you should worry about. Ethan began rebuilding the calculation. Maya watched the screen from several feet away. Do not use the corrected probability from the challenge, she said. Use your original data and update the conditional branch after the third event. Ethan paused. Why? Because otherwise you are proving my point with numbers I already changed. Ethan nodded slowly. Good catch. Richard said nothing. 30 seconds passed. Ethan entered another formula. His forehead tightened. That cannot be right. Richard turned toward him. What? The downside risk moved again. To what? Ethan recalculated. 11.8%. One executive immediately sat straighter. Richard's voice became colder. Check it. I am. Maya looked at the spreadsheet. There is another issue. Richard gave a humorless breath. Of course there is. Maya ignored the tone. Your expected return assumes the high-growth outcome remains available at the original weight even after the risk condition changes. Ethan stared at the screen. Wait. His fingers moved quickly. Richard looked from Ethan to Maya. How much of this model can you actually see from there? Enough. Then sit down. Maya did not move. I am working. Richard glanced around the dining room, as if noticing her uniform again. You just solved a $5 million problem. And table 9 is waiting for coffee. Ethan almost smiled, but his expression changed when another result appeared. Richard. This time there was urgency in his voice. The expected return drops below our approval threshold. Richard went completely still. By how much? I need the full data set before I give you a number I trust. Then get it. Ethan reached for his phone, but Maya spoke first. Do not make a decision from a restaurant table. Richard looked at her sharply. Excuse me. You have enough evidence to know the model needs review. You do not have enough evidence to know the final exposure. Ethan nodded. She is right. We need the source files. Richard stared at both of them. Minutes earlier, he had been testing whether Maya deserved to speak. Now his own analyst was taking instructions from the woman he had treated as entertainment. Maya lifted her tray. You should freeze the decision until the model is rebuilt. Richard studied her face. Do you have any idea how much money is attached to this deal? No, more than $80 million. Maya absorbed the number without changing expression. Then you have 80 million reasons to check your work. Richard looked down at the $5 million pledge. The room around him seemed suddenly louder, though nobody at table 12 spoke. Maya turned toward the service station. Where are you going? He asked. Table 9 still needs coffee. Richard watched her take 2 steps before calling after her. Maya. She stopped. When you finish with table 9, come back. Maya looked over her shoulder. Why? Richard glanced at the broken model on Ethan's screen. For the first time that evening, his voice carried no laughter at all. Because I think I need you to show us what we missed. Maya returned to table 9 with a fresh pot of coffee, refilled 2 cups, and answered a question about dessert as if $5 million and an $80 million investment were not waiting 20 feet behind her. Years earlier, numbers had occupied a different place in her life. At 19, Maya had entered college on a full academic scholarship, carrying 2 suitcases, a second-hand laptop, and the certainty that mathematics was where she belonged. By 21, she was taking graduate-level courses while classmates were still finishing undergraduate requirements. Professors remembered the way she could stare at a complicated proof for 10 silent minutes, and then find the assumption everyone else had accepted without question. Dr. Helen Parker once told her that speed was not Maya's greatest gift. It was doubt. Maya knew how to doubt the right thing. Then life presented a problem no theorem could simplify. Her mother lost one of the 2 jobs keeping their household afloat. Bills accumulated. Maya's younger brother needed stability, transportation, meals, and someone who could be home when their mother worked late. The scholarship covered tuition. It did not cover everything outside the classroom. Maya took a temporary leave and promised herself she would return the following semester. The semester became a year. The year became several. She worked mornings, evenings, weekends, wherever dependable money existed. Mathematics disappeared from her resume, but never from her life. After late shifts, she still opened old textbooks at her kitchen table. She read research papers on her phone during subway rides. She filled inexpensive notebooks with probability theory, optimization problems, and proofs nobody would ever grade. The world stopped calling her a mathematics student long before she stopped being one. Now, inside the Meridian room, Maya placed the coffee pot back at the service station and looked toward table 12. Richard was no longer laughing. Ethan had his laptop open, two spreadsheets filling the screen. Olivia approached Maya quietly. You do not have to go back over there. Maya adjusted the cuff of her uniform. I know. I can tell Mr. Caldwell the restaurant cannot have staff pulled into private business meetings. Maya glanced toward Richard. He is not asking for entertainment anymore. Olivia followed her gaze. What is he asking for? Help. Maya returned to table 12. Richard immediately turned the laptop toward her. Ethan pulled the source data. Maya set her tray down. Did you freeze the decision? Richard hesitated. Ethan answered for him. I sent a message telling the team not to execute anything until morning. Maya nodded. Good. Richard looked irritated by how naturally she accepted that information. Can you show us what is wrong? Maya leaned toward the screen. I can show you what I think is wrong. Your analysts need to verify it. You have already been right 3 times. That does not make the 4th automatic. Ethan looked at Richard. She is right about that too. Maya traced the model without touching the screen. Start here. This probability is updated after new information arrives. But 6 rows later, your expected return calculation reuses the earlier weighting. Ethan frowned. That should have been linked dynamically. It is linked, Maya said. To the wrong state. Ethan opened the formula. His face changed. She is right. Richard leaned closer. What does that mean in dollars? Not yet, Maya said. Richard looked at her. I need a number. You need a correct number. She pointed toward another cell. And before you calculate it, check whether this assumption came from the same branch. Ethan followed the reference. Then he stopped. Richard's eyes moved to him. What now? Ethan turned the laptop slowly. This is not one bad formula. The error propagates through the model. Richard stared at the screen, silent. Maya looked at the numbers she had spent years training herself never to fear. That is why the first answer looked safer than it really was, she said. Richard finally looked at her. The certainty that had filled his voice all evening was gone. How long would it take you to rebuild this? Maya met his eyes. Long enough that you should stop asking what a waitress knows and start asking why nobody on your team caught it. Richard looked at the spreadsheet as if staring longer might force the numbers back into place. How far does the error travel? He asked. Ethan did not answer immediately. He opened another tab, traced the linked formulas, then leaned closer to the screen. Farther than I thought. Maya remained standing beside the table. That is because the model does not fail where the mistake begins. It fails where the mistake gets reused. Richard looked at her. Can you isolate it? Yes, but not by changing one cell. Ethan nodded. We need to rebuild the dependency chain. Richard pushed his untouched dessert aside. Then rebuild it. Ethan opened a clean spreadsheet. Maya pulled the empty chair closer, but did not sit. Start with the original population before any conditions are applied. Ethan entered the base values. Then separate the information events from the decision events. Maya continued. Your current model mixes them together. Richard watched her with a concentration that had replaced every trace of amusement. Why does that matter? Maya looked at him. Because knowing something and acting on something are not the same event. Your model treats them as if they happen simultaneously. Ethan stopped typing. That explains the weighting problem. Exactly. He created 2 new columns. Maya checked the first set of formulas, then shook her head. Not that reference. Use the updated state. Ethan corrected it. One executive leaned toward the screen. What happens to the investment if this holds? We do not know yet, Ethan said. Richard looked impatient. Give me an estimate. Maya answered before Ethan could. An estimate is what got you here. Richard turned toward her. The old Richard might have laughed. This one simply waited. Maya continued. You wanted certainty quickly. The model gave you a clean number, so nobody asked whether the structure deserved that confidence. Ethan looked at the original spreadsheet. She is right. 7.4% looked precise enough that we stopped questioning it. Richard's expression hardened, but not at Maya. Keep going. For the next several minutes, Maya and Ethan rebuilt the sequence. She never pretended to know what the data could not prove. Twice she asked Ethan to verify a source value. Once she rejected her own intermediate calculation after noticing that she had carried forward the wrong state. Richard noticed. Another correction? Maya nodded. Yes. You say that very easily. Because the goal is to get it right, not to look right. Richard said nothing. Ethan entered the final revised assumptions and pressed a key. The new risk estimate appeared. His face went still. 14.2%. One of the executives whispered, "That is nearly double the original estimate." Ethan opened the expected return calculation and updated it. A second number appeared, and the projected return no longer clears our minimum threshold. Richard slowly leaned back. For the first time all evening, he seemed less like the richest man in the room than a man realizing how close confidence had brought him to a costly mistake. "If we had moved Monday," he asked. Ethan chose his words carefully. "We would have approved the deal using a materially distorted risk model." Richard looked toward Maya. "You saw this while carrying plates." Maya's eyes narrowed slightly. "I saw it while doing my job. Those things are not opposites." The sentence landed harder than anything she had written on paper. Richard glanced at her uniform, then at the $5 million pledge beside his hand. "Why are you working here?" Maya's expression cooled. "There it is again." "What?" "The assumption that knowing this makes my job impossible to explain." Richard lowered his voice. "I am asking because I want to understand." Maya studied him for a moment. Before she could answer, a woman from a nearby table rose slowly from her chair. She was in her early 60s, silver-haired, elegant, and staring at Maya as though she had just recognized someone from another lifetime. "Maya Brooks," the woman said. Maya turned toward the voice. Her face changed instantly. "Professor Parker?" Richard looked between them. The woman stepped closer, still visibly astonished. "I knew it was you." Dr. Helen Parker stopped beside table 12 and looked at Maya with the kind of recognition that made the rest of the room disappear. "I wondered what happened to you," she said softly. Maya lowered her tray. "A lot happened." Helen studied her face, then smiled with quiet disbelief. "You still do that thing with your eyes when you are checking a proof." Richard glanced between them. "You know Ms. Brooks?" Helen turned toward him. "I taught her." Ethan straightened in his chair. "Mathematics, probability theory, statistical inference, and later an independent study in stochastic modeling." Richard looked at Maya. "Graduate school?" Maya answered before Helen could. "Undergraduate." Helen gave a small laugh. Technically, Maya was taking graduate seminars before most students in her year had chosen a concentration. Maya looked down. "Professor Parker." "What?" "It is true." Helen noticed the sheets scattered across the table. "What happened here?" Ethan turned the laptop toward her. "She found a dependency error in an investment risk model, then helped us rebuild the structure." Helen examined the screen for several seconds. "That sounds like Maya." Richard leaned forward. "How good was she?" Maya's expression hardened slightly. Helen noticed. "That is the wrong question." Richard frowned. "Why?" "Because you already have evidence in front of you." Helen gestured toward the revised model. "You are asking for my credentials to validate hers." Richard went silent. Maya looked at Helen, surprised. Helen continued. "But if you are asking what I remember a student who could find the hidden assumption in a proof faster than almost anyone I taught in 32 years. Ethan looked toward Maya. "Why did you leave?" Maya drew a slow breath. "My family needed me." Helen's expression softened. "I heard about your mother losing work. I tried reaching you." "I know. You could have come back." "Not then." Maya looked toward the dining room, where plates still needed clearing and guests still needed attention. Tuition was covered. Life was not. Nobody at table 12 interrupted. My younger brother was still in school. My mother was working every hour she could get. Somebody had to make sure rent was paid and dinner was on the table. Richard looked at Maya's uniform again, but differently now. "And you kept studying?" Ethan asked. Maya shrugged. "When I could." Helen smiled. "Knowing Maya, that means constantly." Maya almost smiled back. Richard touched the $5 million pledge beside his plate. "You never mentioned any of this." Maya met his eyes. "You did not ask until after I proved something." Richard absorbed the answer. "Would it have changed how I treated you if I had known?" Maya asked. He hesitated. That hesitation answered for him. Maya nodded. "Exactly." Richard looked down at the paper. "I owe you an apology." Maya waited. "I assumed your correction was luck because of where you were standing when you made it," he continued. "Then when you proved me wrong, I kept creating harder tests instead of reconsidering the assumption." Maya remained still. "That is what happened." Richard nodded. "Yes." Helen watched him carefully. Richard picked up the pledge. "And $5 million goes to the scholarship fund. No conditions beyond what is written here." Maya looked at the signature, then back at him. "Good." Richard seemed almost surprised by the simplicity of her response. "That is all. What else should there be?" "I do not know." I expected this moment to feel different. Maya glanced toward the corrected model on Ethan's laptop. That is because you thought the money was the biggest thing you were risking tonight. Richard followed her gaze. Ethan quietly closed the original spreadsheet. Richard's face became serious again. And what was? Maya answered without raising her voice. The belief that the smartest person in the room would always look like the person you expected. Richard remained silent after Maya's answer. For most of the evening, silence had belonged to everyone else while he decided what mattered. Now it belonged to him. Dr. Helen Parker looked from the corrected spreadsheet to the signed pledge beside Richard's plate. $5 million? She asked. Ethan nodded. Mr. Caldwell increased the challenge after Maya solved the first one. Helen looked at Richard. And what exactly were you trying to prove? Richard leaned back slowly. At first, that she had gotten lucky. And after she proved she had not? Richard did not answer. Maya did. The question changed. Helen's eyes stayed on Richard. I see. Richard glanced around table 12. The executives who had laughed earlier were suddenly fascinated by their screens, their glasses, anything that did not require meeting Maya's eyes. Richard picked up the pledge. The $5 million will be transferred. Maya nodded. To the scholarship fund. Yes. Not to me. I understand. And it should be available to students who have already demonstrated academic ability, but are at risk of leaving school because of financial pressure. Richard studied her. You have thought about this before. Maya's expression softened for only a moment. For years. Helen understood before anyone else did. Students like you were. Maya nodded. Richard looked at the pledge again. Then Caldwell Capital will establish the fund with $5 million. Maya shook her head. No, Richard frowned. You just said that was what you wanted. I said scholarship fund. I did not say your company gets to turn it into advertising. Ethan looked down. Richard's eyebrows rose. You think that is what I would do? Maya held his gaze. I think $5 million can help a lot of students. I also think people with $5 million usually want everyone to know they gave it. Helen almost smiled. Richard absorbed the comment without defending himself. What do you suggest? Independent administration. Clear eligibility rules. No requirement that recipients work for your company. No photographs with oversized checks. No using their hardship as marketing. Richard looked at Ethan. Can we structure that? Yes. Then structure it. Maya nodded once. Good. Richard stared at her for a moment. You negotiate everything. Only when the terms matter. Would you negotiate a job offer? The question changed the atmosphere instantly. Maya's eyes narrowed. What job offer? Richard gestured toward the laptop. My quantitative research division. Ethan looked surprised, but said nothing. You found a structural flaw my team missed, Richard continued. You helped rebuild the model in less than an hour. I would be foolish not to ask. Maya looked at him steadily. You still do not know whether I have a degree. I know what you did tonight. An hour ago, you thought what I did tonight was impossible because I was carrying a tray. Richard lowered his eyes for a second. That is fair. Maya continued. And now you want to jump from underestimating me to hiring me before you know anything about my work history, my goals, or whether I even want to work for you. Richard gave a slow nod. Also fair. Helen watched Maya with unmistakable pride. Richard took a business card from his wallet and placed it on the table. Then I will not offer you a job tonight. Maya looked at the card but did not pick it up. Send me a formal description of the position, compensation, responsibilities, and expectations. Richard almost smiled. You want to evaluate me. I want to evaluate the offer. Ethan finally smiled. Richard nodded. All right. Maya lifted her tray again. Then we understand each other. Before she could leave, Richard spoke once more. Maya. She turned. His expression was different now, stripped of the amusement that had started everything. I am sorry. Maya waited. Richard continued. Not because you turned out to be exceptional. I should not have needed you to be exceptional before treating your voice as worth hearing. Maya studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. That apology is worth more than the first one. She turned toward her waiting tables, leaving Richard beside the corrected model and the $5 million promise, finally quiet enough to understand why. The following Monday morning, Maya was carrying a tray of coffee across the Meridian room when Olivia approached with an envelope. This came for you. Maya recognized the Caldwell Capital logo immediately. Inside was confirmation that $5 million had been placed into an independently administered education fund, exactly under the conditions she had requested. No employment requirement. No promotional appearances. No company branding attached to recipients. The first grants would prioritize students with strong academic records who faced leaving college because of financial hardship. Maya read the document twice. He actually did it, Olivia said. He kept his word, Maya replied. Those are not always the same thing as doing something generous. Olivia studied her. You really are not going to let him impress you easily. Maya folded the letter carefully. Money is impressive when you do not have enough of it. Character takes longer to measure. Her phone vibrated in her apron pocket. An email from Ethan Cole had arrived with a formal position description from Caldwell Capital. Quantitative Research Associate. Full benefits. A salary higher than anything Maya had ever earned. Tuition assistance was included, along with flexible scheduling for completing her degree. She read the responsibilities before looking at the compensation. The work was real. Statistical modeling, probability analysis, model validation, and independent risk review. At the bottom was a short note from Richard. There was no flattery, no mention of the restaurant. Only a request that she evaluate the role and respond when ready. Maya closed the email without answering. That afternoon, she met Dr. Helen Parker at a quiet coffee shop near campus. Helen arrived carrying a folder. Before you ask, no, I did not bring you a job offer. Maya smiled. Good. Helen slid the folder across the table. I brought your academic record. Maya opened it slowly. Years seemed compressed into those pages. Honors courses, advanced probability, independent study, a transcript that simply stopped where life had interrupted it. The university has a returning student pathway, Helen said. Your credits are still valid. You would need to complete the remaining requirements, but you would not be starting over. Maya looked at the transcript. How long? Depending on your schedule, about 3 semesters. Maya ran one finger along the final completed course. I used to think coming back would mean admitting I failed the first time. Helen shook her head. Leaving to keep your family standing was not failure. Maya looked through the coffee shop window. My brother finishes college next spring. Helen smiled. Then perhaps it is your turn. 2 days later, Maya walked into Caldwell Capital's Manhattan office wearing a simple charcoal suit. Richard met her in a conference room overlooking the city. He stood when she entered. Ms. Brooks. Mr. Caldwell. He gestured toward the chair across from him. You received the offer? I did. And Maya placed several printed pages on the table. I have questions. Richard almost smiled. I expected that. Maya pointed to the responsibilities section. Independent model review needs to mean independent. If my compensation depends on approving deals quickly, then you are paying me to agree with people. Richard nodded. We can separate performance evaluation from deal approval. Put it in writing. Done. She turned another page. I am returning to school. Richard paused. You decided? Yes. Then we adjust the schedule. Maya studied him. You are agreeing very quickly. Richard leaned back. 3 nights ago, agreeing quickly was part of my problem. Today I checked with human resources before you arrived. Maya allowed herself a small smile. Richard continued. There is one more thing. Ethan rebuilt the entire model. The deal we were discussing was suspended. Good. The revised analysis showed enough risk that we walked away. Maya nodded. Richard looked toward the skyline. You saved us from making a very expensive mistake. Your team checked the work and made the decision. You found the flaw. Maya held his gaze. Then remember why you almost ignored it. Richard became quiet. Maya gathered the papers. Send me the revised contract. Does that mean you are accepting? She stood. It means I am considering it. Richard smiled, but this time there was no mockery in it. Fair enough. Maya reached the door before he spoke again. Maya, the scholarship received its first applications this morning. She stopped. Richard added, 73 students. Maya looked down for a moment, thinking of a 19-year-old girl with 2 suitcases and a scholarship that could pay tuition but could not solve everything else. Then she looked back at him. Make sure they are judged by what they can do, she said, not by what their circumstances make them look like. 3 months later, Maya Brooks stood inside a university classroom with a probability textbook open beside her laptop and a Caldwell Capital identification card tucked inside her bag. She had accepted the position only after the revised contract protected her independent review authority and allowed her to attend classes 3 days each week. Her mornings began with quantitative research in Midtown Manhattan. Her afternoons ended on campus, completing the degree she had once believed belonged to another version of her life. The transition had not been magical. There were deadlines, late subway rides, difficult assignments, and evenings when exhaustion followed her home. Maya preferred it that way. Nothing about the life she was building needed a fairy tale to make it meaningful. The scholarship fund had already awarded its first grants. 24 students received assistance with housing, transportation, books, childcare, and other costs that traditional scholarships often ignored. One recipient was a nursing student working overnight shifts. Another was an engineering major raising a younger sister. Maya read every anonymous profile the independent board released and recognized pieces of her younger self in each one. On a Friday evening near the end of the semester, Maya returned to the Meridian room. She had promised Olivia she would stop by after class. The restaurant looked exactly as it had before. Warm lights, polished glasses, quiet conversations, servers moving between tables with practiced precision. Daniel saw her first. "Look who finally remembered us." Maya smiled. "I was here 2 weeks ago." That is practically abandonment. Olivia hugged her, then stepped back. "You look tired." "Statistics exam." "How did it go?" "Ask me after the grade posts." From across the dining room, Maya noticed Richard Caldwell seated at table 12 with Ethan and 2 colleagues. Richard saw her moments later. This time, he stood before she reached the table. "Ms. Brooks." Maya looked at the familiar table. "Still making expensive decisions over dessert?" Ethan laughed, not without checking the denominator. Richard smiled. There was no edge behind it now. The revised model has become mandatory review procedure across the firm. Maya nodded. "Good." Richard gestured toward an empty chair. "Join us." "For 5 minutes." She sat. Ethan opened his laptop. "We actually have something you might enjoy." Maya raised an eyebrow. "That sentence usually creates more work for me." Ethan showed her a new forecasting model. Maya studied it for several seconds. Richard watched her, but he did not interrupt. He did not ask whether she understood it. He waited. Maya pointed toward one assumption. "Why are you holding this constant?" Ethan explained. Maya listened, challenged the reasoning, then nodded when his answer satisfied her. Richard noticed something that would once have escaped him. Respect did not mean assuming Maya was always right. It meant giving her reasoning the same serious examination he gave anyone else's. Olivia approached carrying coffee. Richard thanked her by name. Maya noticed that too. Before leaving, Richard handed Maya an envelope. The scholarship board sent this to the office by mistake. Inside was a handwritten note from one of the first recipients. The student explained that the grant meant she no longer had to leave school to cover rent for her family. Maya read the final sentence twice. She folded the note carefully and returned it to the envelope. Richard spoke quietly. "Worth $5 million. Maya looked toward the servers moving through the dining room, then toward the textbooks visible inside her own bag. "Ask those students." She stood. Richard nodded. "Fair answer." Maya started toward Olivia, then Richard called her name. She turned. "I never thank you for stopping that deal." Maya considered him. "Then thank Ethan too. He verified the work." "I did." Richard paused. "And I remembered why I almost ignored you." Maya held his gaze. "That matters more." She walked away from table 12 without needing the room to watch her. Months earlier, Richard had believed the remarkable thing about Maya was that a waitress could understand mathematics better than men earning fortunes to analyze it. He understood differently now. The remarkable thing was how easily intelligence could remain invisible when people decided where it was supposed to come from. Maya had never needed millions, a billionaire, or anyone's surprise to make her brilliant. She had only needed the chance to continue what life had interrupted and the dignity of being heard before anyone decided what she could possibly know.